Hello and welcome to an Introductory Jungle guide for Season 8. This is going to be part 2 of a 3-part series on getting started in the jungle. Be sure to check out the previous video on the different jungle classes prior to viewing this video. In this video, we're going to go over some fundamental basics of jungling that you need to know, followed by a deep dive into the different kinds of jungle paths and counter-jungle paths that you can expect to run into. And lastly, we'll have a discussion on how the different kinds of junglers match up against one another along these paths. The fundamental basics of jungling. If you are an auto-attack based jungler like Tryndamere, you're going to start the game with the Hunter's Machete. If you are an ability based jungler like Fiddlesticks, you're going to start the game with the Hunter's Talisman. When you are clearing the jungle camps, you want to keep your health as high as possible. The easiest way to do this is through kiting jungle monsters between attacks. The goal is to avoid taking consecutive attacks from the jungle monster and to buy time for your abilities and auto attacks to be available again. In this example, Graves kites the red buff successfully and walks away at full health without using any pots. Another method that is unique to Hunter's Talisman is to aggro more than one camp and to use the damage over time effect of Talisman to keep a camp leashed outside of its leash range. This will minimize the amount of damage that you take from the camp while you can benefit from the heals of Hunter's Talisman. In this example, Evelyn uses Hate Spike to hit multiple targets and the damage over time effect keeps them coming back to her, allowing her to use them as a source of continuous healing. Ultimately, this allows her to walk away with the red buff at level 3 with full health. Another method, if you have the right kit for it, is to do 2 camps at once. It's possible to leash the blue buff close to the Gromp and do them together, as in this example where Fiddlesticks uses Dark Wind to deal damage to both the Gromp and blue buff while he clears them together. If the champion you're playing has any kind of multi-target spells in their kit, there's a good chance that they are candidates for these kind of clears. Know that it is very easy to mess this up, so be sure to practice this in sandbox mode before you take it into game. The Wolf camp and the Raptor camp will be the first ones to spawn, followed by both buffs, followed by Krugs and Gromp, which spawn much later. What this means is that any and all jungle paths will start at Wolves, Raptors, or either buffs. The red buff side of the jungle grants slightly more experience than the blue buff side of the jungle in exchange for being significantly harder to clear. Clearing any 3 camps will, however, get you to level 3. The highest level you can reach on your first clear is level 4, and you must clear the Krugs to get there, with one exception that we will get to later. The difficulty of clearing the jungle camps is ranked as follows for most junglers. The Wolf camp is the easiest. This is followed by Gromp for single target junglers and the Raptor camp for multi-target junglers. And lastly, the Krugs is an absolute pain to clear. The implications of this is that there's a 90% chance that junglers will take the Wolves early on and leave Krugs for last. Junglers typically start their clears with the help of their AD carry and support and work their way to the other side of the map. The implications of this is that the topside river tends to be dangerous early on while the bottom side river is comparatively safe. The following jungle paths are derived from these basic fundamentals of jungling. Our first path is the standard jungle path. Every single jungler needs to be comfortable with this jungle path, and it's also the easiest path in the game. The main perks of this path is a leash from your AD carry and support, clearing the wolf camp to take minimal damage, and securing both buffs. This path allows most junglers to reach level 3 with both buffs with the highest amount of health possible. Continuing from your top side buff, you'll end up in the river, and from here we have 2 common scenarios. The jungler that takes the standard jungle path will often go for a gank on the top or mid lane, as in this example where Rek'Sai ganks Riven in the top lane, securing a kill with the help of her top laner. The other common scenario is a collision between the 2 junglers on the top side of the map. This can take place in the river or either side of the jungle. This is often a gamble based off the class of junglers, and it tends to lean towards whoever has more experience, as in this example where veteran Eve takes out the enemy Kayn inside his own jungle. There are 2 common deviations to the standard jungle path that you need to know. The first deviation is the single target jungle path. This is for junglers who can only hit one target with most of their spells or attacks. You'll start on the bottom side of the map with the help of your AD carry and support as usual, and you'll take both buffs, but instead of doing the wolf camp, you'll be taking the Gromp to reach level 3. The benefit of this path for single target junglers is that it is a faster path to level 3 than it is to do the wolf camp. Next, we have the multi-target jungle path that's popular for tanks. This is a delayed version of the standard clear for junglers who are better with multi-target camps. You'll be starting at the bottom side buff as usual with the help of your AD carry and support. And then you will clear the Wolves and Raptors or Raptors and Wolves depending on which side of the map you're on, at which point you'll reach level 3 and do your top side buff. The key benefits of this path is that Hunter's Talisman junglers are able to regenerate a lot of health on the Raptors camp, and they're also level 3 when they take on the top side buff. The delayed nature of this path means that you'll avoid an immediate collision with the enemy jungler in the river, which is a good idea if the matchup is not favorable. If you choose to go this path, be sure to notify your top laner that the other jungler might reach the top side of the map before you do. This path might also be a bit mana intensive, so try the path in sandbox mode before you take it into game. Our next path is the full clear jungle path. This is the path for junglers who don't want to gank early on and just want to farm experience and gold. You start off on the blue side jungle with the help of your AD carry and support, or your top laner depending on which side you're on. We clear the entire blue buff side of the jungle because that side of the jungle is much easier to clear than the red buff side of the jungle. Once you reach level 3, you proceed to clear the red buff side of the jungle in its entirety. This clear is quite difficult and you may need to make use of the Skull Crab to keep your health up when attempting this clear. If you do get to the end, you can buy quite a few items when you get back to base. A key point to keep in mind while going through this path is that you should be ready to break your jungle path at any time to intervene and help in a lane if you have enough health left to help. Next up, we have Kayn's jungle path. You'll be starting with what is most likely a solo clear at the Raptor camp, followed by doing the red buff. The requirements for this path are a bit steep. You must have strong area of effect abilities, sustain built into your kit, and the ability to take on single target camps without any assistance. After clearing the Raptors from red buff, you will clear the entire blue side jungle. The key benefit of this clear is that it does not telegraph your opening to your opponents. Your bottom lane does not have to leash for you, which can put them at an advantage against the bottom lane that did leash for their jungler. Almost every veteran Kayn player that you run into will be using this path. Our next path is the fast level 4 clear, which allows you to reach level 4 without having to do the Krugs. This jungle path is unique in that it requires that you not complete the camp that you started at. You'll be starting at the wolf camp, taking the large wolf, one of the small wolves, and then you'll proceed to clear the blue buff. Once you've secured the blue buff, you will move on to clearing the grump. And then you will clear out the wolf camp on your way towards the red buff side of the map, where you will take the Raptors and the red buff to reach level 4. Now you might wonder, why does this work? The reason is that catch-up experience only applies to large jungle monsters that are of a higher level than you. By keeping yourself at level 1 during the first 2 camps, you will benefit from the bonus experience on the wolf and the blue buff. And this extra bonus experience allows you to reach level 4 without having to do the Krugs. I am going to credit a YouTuber by the name of iJustRengar for bringing this jungle path to my attention. The key benefit of this jungle path is that it allows you to gain levels quickly. It does, however, have one major downside, and that is that it leaves your lanes vulnerable to the enemy jungler during the early stages of the game. If you want to use this route, be sure to let your teammates know that you will not be ganking during the first 4 minutes of the game. Next up, we have the early recall jungle path. This path involves starting on the blue buff side of the jungle, clearing the entirety of the blue side, then recalling to buy another hunter's item. The benefit of this path is that attempting to clear the entirety of the jungle on your first set of items is quite difficult on most champions. However, if you have the mobility to make it out of base quickly, along with the ability to clear camps quickly, it may be worthwhile to recall early and buy another hunter's item, as all junglers have considerably improved jungle clears once they have acquired both hunter's machete and a hunter's talisman. Do take note that this jungle path leaves the red buff side of your jungle open to the enemy jungler. Do not attempt this jungle path on junglers that have slow clears or low mobility. Next up, we have the extremely aggressive level 2 gank jungle path. This path involves starting at the red buff, clearing it to reach level 2, and immediately going for a gank on one of your lanes. If successful, this is the quickest way to snowball any lane in the game. Note that it does leave your other buff exposed, so you'll want to head towards your second buff immediately after your gank. You must absolutely avoid tower diving or taking a significant amount of damage when attempting this path. Otherwise, the enemy jungler could come after you inside your own jungle. Only attempt this jungle path on junglers with extremely strong level 2 ganks. Next up, we have the full blue buff side clear jungle path. This jungle path involves clearing the entirety of the blue buff side of the jungle and attempting a gank on one of your lanes. This path typically provides a faster level 3 gank than is possible through jungle paths that involve crossing between the red buff and blue buff side of the jungle. The main drawback of this jungle path is that appearing in a lane at level 3 with only your blue buff is an invitation for a map-aware enemy jungler to go take your red buff. While Amumu is successful in this example where he clears the entire blue buff side then goes for a gank on the enemy Darius, I would strongly advise against using this jungle path. Lastly, we have the early dragon jungle path. This jungle path involves starting with your jungle item and 3 HP potions and saving your smite for use on the dragon. You will want to use a jungler that has a massive amount of sustain. You will go from your top side buff to the wolves to the bottom side buff, then enter the dragon pit. Once there, you will proceed to clear the dragon using all HP pots and both smites as needed to keep yourself healthy. It's very easy to mess up this jungle path, so you'll want to make sure you try it in sandbox mode before you attempt it in game. The success of this jungle path hinges on the enemy jungler taking any one of the standard paths that takes him from the bottom side of the map towards the top side. While most dragons aren't that important early in the game, an Infernal Dragon is always worth it. The vast majority of jungle paths that you encounter will consist of going from the bottom side of the map towards the top side. This is the reason the following counter-jungling jungle paths are available. Our first counter-jungling path is for the blue side jungler, and it's the Raptors and red buff steal. The blue side jungler will start at his opponent's Raptors and proceed to clear that, followed by taking the red buff. The success of this clear hinges on the enemy jungler starting at his blue buff with the help of his bottom lane and doing the wolf camp at the very least before entering his topside jungle. Note that the jungler on the red side is extremely unlikely to go from the blue buff to the red buff. The reason for this is that he would have to clear the Raptors or the Krugs to reach level 3, which is much more painful than clearing the wolves. And so given the fact that the red side jungler will clear at least 2 camps on the bottom side of his jungle, this makes the Raptors and the red buff easy targets for the blue side jungler. Our next counter jungling path is simply stealing the top side buff. This path works for both junglers on the blue side and the red side. Given that the opposing jungler is likely to start at the bottom side buff with the help of his bottom lane, you always have the option of starting at their top side buff, as in this example where Jarvan starts his jungle clear at his opponent's blue buff. Our next counter jungling path is the Krug steal that's available to the red side jungler. This jungle path involves starting in the top side of your jungle, securing both buffs on level 3 and immediately heading into your opponent's jungle. As your opponent is working his way from the bottom side of the jungle towards the top side, you will not run into him inside his bottom side jungle. Given that junglers tend to avoid doing the Krugs early on, this means that the blue team's Krugs will be free for you to take. And if they haven't done their Raptor camp, that can be a bonus camp for you to steal as well. You can follow up this counter jungling path with a very unexpected gank on the bottom lane in the early stages of the game. Our last counter jungling path is the level 2 cheese. This path consists of taking the red buff without using smite and immediately heading into your opponent's jungle. The goal is to intercept your opponent as they jungle their way towards the top side of the map. Odds are that you will catch them out at the wolf camp or the blue buff depending on which side of the jungle you're on. Now you might wonder, why are some of these paths specific to the red side or blue side? For example, why can't I take 2 topside camps from my opponent as a red side jungler? The answer is that the fundamental basics of jungling imply very strong jungling habits that make it unlikely that these paths will be successful if you try a blue side jungler's counter jungling path as a red side jungler. This also holds true the other way around. Should you try to steal the red side Krugs as the blue side jungler, you might run into a bit of trouble. Now before you get excited and run into your opponent's jungle, there are a few things that you must know before you attempt these counter jungling paths. First, you must be able to clear camps quickly by yourself. This means if you're playing a single target jungler like Warwick, you are not going to start at the enemy Raptors. And second, you must go into your opponent's jungle no sooner than 10 seconds before the camp spawn and monitor your opponent's lanes with intense paranoia to see if anyone is moving towards you. We do this to avoid running into enemy laners that might be guarding their jungler's camps, as well as avoiding getting collapsed on. Make sure you know the matchup well before you pick a fight with the enemy jungler inside his own jungle. While you might be the best Amumu player in the world, that does not mean it's a good idea to pick a fight with the enemy Rengar. There are less common counter jungling paths that are unique to specific champions, but all counter jungling paths have one thing in common. They exploit the fact that junglers tend to start with the leash on the bottom side of the map and work their way towards the top side. And using this information, they are able to steal your jungle camps or intercept you along your jungle path and kill you. And that's what brings us to our counter jungling path to avoid running into the enemy jungler. This is the reverse clear jungle path and is the exact opposite of the standard jungle path. This path has not changed over the years and simply consists of starting at your top side buff, grabbing the wolves, and taking your bottom side buff to reach level 3 with both buffs secured. For added safety, try to do this clear without a leash and ask your bottom lane to fake a leash to give false information to the enemy team should they be monitoring your bottom lane. This path also allows for an unexpected early gank on the bottom lane when your opponents are expecting you to be heading towards the top side of the map. In this example, Eve starts at a red buff with the help of her top laner. She then clears the wolf camp, then heads over to the blue buff and clears that as well to reach level 3. She times her unexpected entry into the bottom lane just after Ezreal uses Essence Flux, and with the help of her bottom lane, she's able to secure a kill on the enemy AD carry. Now let's talk about how the different classes of junglers match up along these jungle paths. While the standard jungle route and its deviations are accessible to all junglers, it should be the preferred path of bruisers and assassins. They have strong ganking potential combined with tons of damage and can fight the other classes of junglers quite well. Carries and tank junglers should avoid this path when facing assassins and bruisers, as they're too weak early on and risk getting counter-ganked or killed in their own jungle by assassins and bruisers. The full clear jungle path should be favored by carries and tanks when facing assassins or bruisers, as it allows them to gain golden experience safely. This path should be avoided by assassins and bruisers as it does not take advantage of their early game potential. Kayn's jungle path should only be used by junglers who have strong AoE clears and sustain built into their kit. The fast level 4 jungle path should only be used by junglers with fast clears who do not have strong level 3 ganks. This is usually a carry jungler. The early recall jungle path should be avoided by junglers of all classes. The level 2 gank jungle path should only be attempted by Assassins and Buisers against immobile targets. This path is generally terrible on carries and tanks with minor exceptions. The full clear of the blue buff side followed by a gank jungle path should be avoided by all junglers. The early gank reveals that your red buff is free for the enemy jungler to take. The early dragon clear is for junglers with an absurd amount of sustain. The only time I would prioritize this jungle path is when there is an Infernal Dragon available. The counter-jungling paths are accessible to all classes of junglers. That being said, be sure to pick junglers within these classes who have high mobility and fast clears. Keep in mind where your opponents are when you enter the enemy jungle. The reverse clear jungle path is accessible to all classes of junglers, but you'll want to practice doing it without a leash. For carries and tanks, this jungle path provides a counter-jungling free experience. This path also allows for surprise ganks on the mid lane from below the river and on the bottom lane, which also makes it a good path for Assassins and Buisers. In general, this path is also good if you're playing against a jungler who's more experienced, as you do not want to run into them on the top side of the map. Now let's go over a summary of everything that we've covered in this video. The fundamental basics of jungling revolve around efficient clears through kiting monsters, prioritizing easy camps, and getting a leash from your bottom lane. The following jungle paths are derived from these fundamentals. The standard path for Buisers and Assassins. The full clear path for tanks and carries. Kayn's path for junglers who are similar to Kayn. The fast level 4 path for scaling junglers with weak early ganks. The 2 blue side clear paths, both of which should be avoided. The level 2 gank path for aggressive plays on immobile targets. The early dragon path for high sustain junglers. These counter jungling paths counter the common jungling paths. And lastly, the leashless reverse clear path to avoid getting counter jungled. If you enjoyed this video, do subscribe to the channel, follow on Twitter, and check out the video links on either side. Leave a comment about the kind of content you'd like to see in future videos, and check out the Patreon link if you'd like to support this channel directly.